Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Star Wars at its core is a dystopian galaxy. It's run by an imperfect republic, which, like every other government system that came before it and after, struggled at creating peace and stability. The republic took a more hands-off, laissez-faire approach to the markets, which, as we've discussed in many of our recent videos, led to disastrous outcomes for many systems when large corporations more powerful than planets swept in and stole resources and exploited the local labor. During the Republic period, unfortunately, some of the most ambitious individuals who dreamed the biggest were also very vicious and ruthless individuals with no moral scruples. These were individuals with a desire for power and credits that was quite unnatural and almost Sith-like, and far exceeded that of the average man. I mean, we all are greedy to a certain level, but I think most of us can't even comprehend what like 1 billion credits is. We'd be happy with just a few million credits. Heck, some of us would be happy with 250,000 credits or 10,000 credits. All I really need is enough to buy a Gazanti-class cruiser and fill it up with fuel so I could get to the Outer Rim and, have some adventures. But here's the thing, if it's not the Republic that's in charge with all of these very powerful business and corporate entities, you'd have something like the Rakatan Infinite Empire or the Galactic Empire, where you're replacing business people with the government, the Empire. And these government-backed viceroys and moffs, who were oftentimes more ruthless and violent than their corporate counterparts, were also less skilled because they weren't held in check by a free market, by shareholders, by the need to make profits. There's really no accountability at all for these guys, no consequences. They only had to worry about the emperor. And so despite all of the flaws that the Republic system might have had, all the inequality that their free markets created, you occasionally did have entrepreneurs who truly benefited society because not only were they ambitious, they were also smart, they were passionate, and very well aware and empathetic about the communities that they were serving. As we discussed in previous videos, how in the Republic you had good monarchs and also bad monarchs, the same thing can be applied to the Republic's many capitalists. Although the system itself had very little checks on the greed and ambition of man, occasionally you did have individuals who were guided by their own set of moral standards and codes, which allowed them to create widely successful businesses that also uplifted entire populations out of poverty. Today, we'll be telling you the extraordinary story of Cloud City, perhaps one of the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurship, risk, and innovation in all of Star Wars. And to understand Cloud City, you have to understand the entrepreneur behind this entire project, a freedom-loving Corellian rogue by the name of Elesus Fig. Which honestly is more of a, Harry Potter name than a Star Wars name, but fine. Fig came from a modest family on Corellia, and he was reported to be quite gifted with the arts at a pretty young age, and he had a really solid mind for business. When he reached adulthood, Fig, like many lower-class Corellians, snuck on a freighter without a ticket and ventured off-world into the wider galaxy seeking fame and fortune on the Corellian Spire. It was during this period in his life, while doing odd jobs, that Fig found quite a special business opportunity. While surveying the gas giant of Bespin, Fig realized there were many useful gases in the atmosphere that could be exploited for profit. This included Tabana gas, which was widely used as a coolant and fuel, but also the primary ingredient used for blaster ammunition. Fig had big ideas, but he lacked the capital to actually see these ideas through, and even if he had the capital, let's be honest, he didn't have the experience to run an operation this complicated. And so he, stored that idea away for a later date, and he started working again on different odd jobs, collecting more resources and more experience. His luck would change while working as a steward on a luxury liner. He managed to save the life of a lesser Alderaanian noble named Yareth. The two would wed, and more importantly, Yareth's personal wealth would be able to fund Fig's ambitious business ideas. This is definitely not the first time a Alderaanian princess fell in love for a Corellian rogue, right? At first, Fig started out with smaller scale mining operations, but what made him different was he chose planets and moons that were deemed too hostile or dangerous by traditional mining standards. This significantly lowered the cost of obtaining charters or permissions for exploiting resources on those planets, and this is how Fig was so successful. It was kind of like he found a niche. You see, Fig was an excellent surveyor and even better at assessing risk. He also wasn't afraid of incorporating new practices and innovative technologies and ideas to overcome any hurdles his operations ran into. There was really no orthodoxy in how he did things. He was really just a true problem solver, someone who came up with ideas, his own ideas usually. Fig would build up numerous operations that proved the experts wrong and turn otherwise inhospitable planets and moons into very successful mining operations. Kind of reminds me a lot of Cloud City's future administrator Lando Calrissian, who also invested in all sorts of crazy mining operations like Nomad City, which was a massive moving mining colony propped up on dozens of walker legs. It had to constantly move because the planet was so close to its local star that only the night side was, cold enough for any habitation. The miners on Nomad City used the fleet of vehicles known as mole miners that dug quick tunnels and extracted minerals from the area around Nomad City. Lando even built massive shield ships that allowed transports to fly close enough to the planet, as most traditional ships couldn't handle the heat. In less than a decade, Fig's wealth grew to a pretty large size, and finally, he had the experience and the resources to tackle his Bespin business idea. Now, several other companies had attempted to mine the gases of this world, but had failed. The strategy most companies used was the deployment of smaller gas-collecting vehicles from a larger mothership that was usually parked higher in orbit. This method didn't work so well on Bespin because of the composition of the upper atmosphere, and so these prior operations resulted in completely unusable yields. Now, Elesus had figured out that in Bespin's lower atmosphere, where it was a bit more difficult to reach, there were pockets of high-quality Tabana gas, which was ideal for the creation of blaster munitions. This gas was even naturally spin-sealed, which meant it was hyper-compressed, which of course cuts down the cost of processing the gas for the end market. Figs realized that this was going to be a huge problem, right? All of this compressed Tabana gas was about 23,000 kilometers lower than the habitable space on the planet. The gravity and heat, along with the turbulent and dangerous electrical storms down below, made it pretty much impossible for manned vehicles to go down safely. And even the use of automated droids might not work as well. You're still going to lose ships, and these ships most likely don't have enough storage to make this entire endeavor economical. You really need to increase the amount of gas you're mining in order to lower your operations costs. And so Figs came up with an ingenious idea. Instead of going down to the gas, what if he brought it up to him by pumping it up? So if you take a look at Cloud City, you'll notice that at the bottom of the city is a very long stem with a bulb on the bottom. Well, that's a giant reactor inside of the bulb, and it's powering many tractor beams. You see, these tractor beams would be used to funnel all of that compressed gas from down below up into this structure. Once the gas reaches the bottom of the bulb, it's sucked into several smaller reactor shafts where the material is processed and then frozen into carbon, where it could be stored safely and easily and shipped off to the end market. This is why, by the way, Darth Vader froze Han Solo in carbonite on Cloud City. As a younger man, he had run into the technology during the Clone Wars while trying to infiltrate a hyper-secure separatist prison. When Vader realized that Cloud City also had this technology, he thought it'd be a perfect way to, punish and secure Han Solo. And so Fig had this extraordinary idea to funnel compressed Tabana gas from below up into the surface so that he could extract it, in massive amounts. That will surely be profitable if he could actually build this station, which is a big if. And that's because first, Bespin was kind of remote. It was located in the Anode system, a system that he actually was the first to map a safe hyperspace route to. Building a massive floating city was resource intensive and manpower intensive, and he basically had no infrastructure in system that he could rely on. And this was a massive project. It was over 16 kilometers in diameter and 30 kilometers in height. This wasn't exactly the Death Star, but it's easily bigger than a super star destroyer. And while Fig had a lot of resources from his wife's side of the family and a lot of political connections on Coruscant that could help him, get the permits and also raise money for this project, he still didn't have that kind of money that he needed to start Cloud City. And so once again, Fig had to think outside the box. This time, he looked at the neighboring planet, also in the Anode system, Gents. It was the homeworld of the Ugnaughts, a small and peaceful species that were extremely gifted in tinkering and building things. Unfortunately, their world was repeatedly targeted by slavers, and many of the planet's tribes were completely enslaved and living under horrible conditions. Fig would actually buy 3 entire tribes of Ugnaughts: the Erden, Bottrot, and Isid. He proposed a deal to them. Work for him, help him build his Cloud City, and in return, the Ugnaughts would have their freedom and also shares in his company. They'd also get a portion of Cloud City, which they could operate and also call home. The Ugnaughts agreed to this amazing deal and started working on plans for Cloud City, drawn up by an Alderaanian architect by the name of Necrono. Many theorize that Fig chose an Alderaanian architect to please his wife, but the reality is Alderaanian style is beloved across the galaxy and seen as an extremely elegant and beautiful style. It's not just something you would normally see on such a large industrial mining project, but more on that later because Fig had big dreams. There's a reason why he made Cloud City so elegant. Now, getting resources for this project is also going to be crazy because Bespin is kind of located very far away from everything. You're going to have to add shipping costs for all the materials. Now, Fig actually looked into building a mining operation on the hot planet Demiser, which was also in the local system. He had another crazy idea to build a rolling mining station that would only stay in the dark side of the planet so it wasn't exposed to the hot side of the planet. I'm almost certain that this is where Lando Calrissian gets his inspiration from Nomad City. Unfortunately for Fig, though, the operation on Miser didn't go as well as planned, and that is because the surface was too rugged for wheeled vehicles. Lando would solve this problem with Nomad City by replacing the wheels on this moving mining outpost with legs. Now, Cloud City still had to float somehow above the surface of this gas giant. It wasn't a space station in orbit, it was in the upper atmosphere where the air was mostly comprised of oxygen and the temperature was quite mild. But in order to stay afloat, this massive complex needed an extremely reliable and powerful repulsor lift system. Fig would contract a company known as Incom Corporation, who at the time was only known for building repulsor lifts and not the X-Wing. Roughly a decade after Fig first surveyed Bespin, Cloud City was finally up and running, and it was an immensely profitable venture. His wife's family recouped their investment by many times and received massive dividend payments on the reg. Fig did so well that the Alderaanians actually made him into a noble. Now, you'd think that Fig would stop right there, right? I mean, he's created an immensely profitable venture, primarily because the scale of his operation was so large, he could produce Tabana gas at a fraction of the price of his competitors. But there's a caveat here. You see, Tabana gas could be used for coolant, fuel, and hyperdrives, and many other industrial applications, but that type of Tabana gas was lower density and nowhere near as volatile. It was far less regulated and restricted than the mining of weapons-grade Tabana gas, which is where the real money was. And under the Republic's, pretty pacifist government, only a handful of companies actually had licenses to either buy or sell Tabana gas, and there were mainly mining companies or weapons producers like Merson, Blastech, Sorosub. Fig's Cloud City's operation technically could refine Tabana as long as they sold it to authorized intermediaries and had a Republic export license, which I'm guessing Fig did manage to line up. Again, he had a lot of connections with the Coruscant elite, but I'm pretty sure he also sold some of that Tabana gas, the weaponized military grade stuff, to, the black market. Now, when the Empire took over control, they passed the Tabana gas mining regulation decree that classified Tabana as a heavily restricted substance, and without an Imperial contract, mining weapons grade Tabana for export was illegal. The Empire was always obsessed with controlling all the weapons so that the civilian populace couldn't rise up against it. Luckily, Fig had already diversified where he was selling Tabana gas to. His operation was massive, and so he sold to a lot of, again, industrial companies that needed it for a variety of, peaceful uses, I guess you could say. And more importantly, he had built Cloud City with the full intention of supporting not only the mining operations and back offices for his company, but for an entire city. Cloud City had over 300 levels of buildings, and at its height, it had a population of over 6 million people. The city had a very well-established tourist industry along with luxury dining, shopping, entertainment, and even gambling. Although, like in Singapore, Fig made it illegal for local citizens to gamble, only tourists were allowed to. Actually, it's a very smart thing to do because gambling brings you in a lot of profits, but it's actually horrible for the local populace. It tends to take money from the poorest in society and redistributes it to the wealthy. Even if you do have government taxes on casinos, essentially you're doing is taking money from the poor and then giving it back to them in services, which makes very little sense. In Cloud City's case, the revenue from gambling and the tourist industry were just another stream of income. Cloud City would become an extremely desirable place to live, far removed from the politicians and conflicts of the core, and well protected and stable and luxurious for an outer rim planet. It also set a record as the longest established colony on a gas giant. Later on in Fig's life, he would actually carve out more hyperspace lanes connecting the Note sector to even Iradu, which was another hub in the Outer Rim. And the Ugnaughts freed were forever grateful for Figs and would continue operating and living inside the Cloud City. They would call the platform their home. It's easy to take a look at a capitalist and free market system and point out everything wrong with it. We do it all the time on this channel, but there also are some really good things about this kind of system because you are essentially democratizing trade and allowing the consumer to choose who they want to purchase from or not. And in this system, even though it seems like a lot of greedy, selfish criminals make it to the top, the reality is a lot of times people with bad business models who who are criminals, who exploit people, they don't have long-lasting business models. They'll be successful in the short term by cheating, by exploiting, by smudging numbers so shareholders don't know what they're doing. But in the long run, these type of operations almost always fail. At the end of the day, nothing can really replace good corporate governance, good corporate citizenship, and a business model that actually helps society and doesn't take away from it. A company that builds a product that they can be proud of, that its employees are happy to work for, is a solid company. And that is a brand that can last for decades, if not centuries. We oftentimes forget in our criticism of capitalism that it is extremely difficult to operate a successful business. It's even more difficult to stay relevant and avoid potential pitfalls as the industry changes and market conditions change as well. But just like the force, the dark side of business, again, all of those negative behaviors that I talk about are wholly unnatural and create a lot of friction between you and the consumer, you and the regulators, you and the markets. And that is another thing that will pull down that business and make it unusable. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.